Hi, welcome to Tactical OP and Neo's Handguns and Reloading. I'm OP, and there's Neo. Okay, in this video we're going to be setting up the Hornady case activated powder measure up on the Hornady Lock and Load AP press. Okay, I'm going to have to move the camera around quite a bit on this video, but I'll try to keep it as steady as possible. Okay, we've already taken our case activated powder measure apart, cleaned the pieces, and changed it over for pistol. Alright, now we want to take this baffle and drop it inside the hopper. I'll set the camera down. Okay, now the way I like to do it, and I don't know if it matters one way or another, but I like to have the slots that are in the baffle here matching, lined up with the slot in the body of the powder measure. So what I want to do is line that up, and I'm going to drop the baffle down the hopper just like so. Okay, it doesn't have to sit perfectly straight. It will not. My hopper is discolored from the gunpowder that's been through it, and yours will do it too after time. But as long as you get it where it's not turned sideways, it's fairly even. See the point of the baffle through the glass in the hopper slightly. You can see it, but that's all you have to do there. Okay, now we're going to lay it down on its side here. I'm going to tilt the camera down where we can see what we're doing here. This is pretty simple. We're just going to grab one of our lock and load bushing lock rings, run it up on to the base of the powder measure. Okay, we've got a lock ring for our lock and load bushing on the powder measure. Now we're going to grab a lock and load bushing, place that in the third stage on the press, lock it in. You're going to need a casing. 40 casing is what I am set up for right now. And go ahead and we'll stick that into the shell plate. Have it ready. Now grab your case activated powder measure, and we're going to set it into the bushing. It's a little easier. I'm doing it with one hand, but a lot easier when you can use two. Okay, we're going to get it started in here. We won't run it down too far until we get a casing around to be pushing up on it when we have the shell plate in the up position. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's cycle that around, run it through the sizer die, expander die, and leave the handle down when you get it to the station with the case activated powder measure. Okay, now what we're going to watch here is the metering assembly. Okay, as we screw the powder measures down into the bushing, it's going to make contact with that casing, and this metering assembly is slightly and slowly going to travel up. Okay, so what we're going to do, what we're after, is in the full stroke of the shell plate being up, we want this metering assembly to travel almost the full distance of the slot. We don't want it to contact the slot, the end of the slot. And that is the way Hornady says set it up. Okay, I have had issues after loading about 2,000 to 3,000 rounds where when I'm cycling the press, I'm running in progressive mode and use just one casing after another, the suddenly the metering assembly hangs up. The rotor doesn't turn. It just stays here. When I pull the handle back up, when the shell plate comes back down, this did not travel back down. It was stuck. Okay, well, okay. I've loaded a lot of casings. Maybe this needs to be cleaned up here. Our push rod assembly in the lower end. Pulled that apart, cleaned it. It had a little bit of metallic film on it. Didn't really see an issue, but cleaned it up anyway. Reassembled it. 50-60 casings later, metering assembly hangs up again. Okay. So the next step was to disassemble again, and I put a real light grease on this push rod assembly, seeing if that would help. I checked out my return spring here. It was in good shape. Didn't really see what the problem was, so I reassembled with light lube on here. May have got 100 casings done before it started doing the same thing. Rotor and metering assembly would hang up. So then I discovered something. If I changed the depth of the powder measure in the bushing and made it where the metering assembly had about a 1/4 inch gap from bottoming out in the slot. Spin it around where you can see where our linkage is at. It kept this linkage from getting in a position where it had more leverage than the spring. The spring really has a lot of pull on this assembly up until about this point, to about the point of probably 7/8 of the travel. Then it gets to what seems like a breakover point, and in this little bit, that last 1/8, you do not feel the spring tension on this assembly like you do when it's right here. So this is the way I set it up now. I'm turning this in. I've had the shell plate up with a casing in it to push up on the push rod assembly and cycle our powder measure slowly as we're screwing this into the bushing. You can see it started to raise a little bit, and once it starts going, it seems to happen fairly quickly. I mean, probably about 6 or 8 more turns is going to have it in the full stroke position. Just be sure you have your lock ring run up close to the top of your base of your powder measure as far as the threads go. Okay, now we're getting really close to where I like to set it. Just turn it a little bit more. It won't even take a full turn now. I set it where the metering assembly is about 1/4 of an inch away from bottoming out in this slot. Like I said, I'd been loading bullets with it set the way Hornady says, so my metering assembly was adjusted such for my powder charge. After I set it like this, I did not have to go and readjust my metering assembly. I measured each charge. I thought, well, maybe since it's not fully cycling, it's not dropping the full amount through into the rotor. Not the case. I'm still getting the same amount of powder. I'm just not letting the metering assembly go quite as high up, so the spring has a little bit more tension on this linkage to pull it back down when I raise the handle back up and the shell plate goes down. This is about where I want it set. So now I'm going to spin the lock ring down, tighten it, grab my small Allen wrench, give a few turns on the pinch bolt for the lock ring so I can bring the bushing and all out together with the assembly, and then reclock it where the metering assembly is facing me while I'm loading. Okay, lock ring pinch bolts tight. It is set in the bushing. Let's go ahead and bring our shell plate down, raise the handle back up. Okay, now let's take bushing and all, lift it up out of the press and turn it to where the metering assembly will be facing you while you're charging. Let's see, that's a little too much for me. Drop it right here. Cool. Alright, so now I've got this facing right at me when I need to set my powder charge. Okay, now let's move a casing back to the station. That will activate the powder measure on stroke. Okay, here we go. Going down with the handle, up with the casing, watching our metering assembly as we go all the way with the handle. Handle is set all the way down, and there is the gap on our metering assembly to the body of the powder measure. That is about where I like to have it, right there. Just remember that when you go from one caliber to the next, you need to reset the depth. The difference in case height is what determines the amount of travel. So if you go from loading 40 to 9, you're going to need to drop this further into the bushing. But I always set it the same gap, the metering assembly the same gap away from the end of the slot here. So that's all there is to it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section. Thanks. Boring.